3 True Rainy Night Horror Stories. Volume 2 with rain sounds. Story 1. The House Cleaner's Discovery. My name is Natasha Perez, and I'm 31 years old. I work as an independent house cleaner in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts. And the night I was cleaning a vacant house during a severe thunderstorm and discovered evidence of a crime scene being covered up, is the night I realized that some houses hold secrets that no amount of cleaning can erase. Before I begin, if you ever work in residential cleaning, pay attention to stains and marks that don't make sense. Keep listening, because what I discovered that night would lead me to uncover a crime that had been carefully hidden from everyone. I had been doing house cleaning for about 8 years. The work was steady. The pay was decent. I could set my own schedule, which was important since I had 2 kids at home. Most of my clients were families in suburban homes who needed help maintaining their houses. Some were elderly people who couldn't do the heavy cleaning themselves. Some were business owners preparing a home for sale or rental. The job I had on Thursday evening was a rental house that was between tenants. The landlord had called and said the house needed a deep clean before the new tenants moved in on Friday. I had been given a key and instructions to lock up when I was done. I had planned to clean during the day, but the landlord's schedule changed, and now I was cleaning in the evening. By the time I arrived, it was already getting dark. By 8 o'clock when I started, the sky was completely dark, and the weather was turning bad. The house was a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was about 30 years old. It needed work, but had good bones. I started in the kitchen. I cleaned the cabinets. I wiped down the counters. I scrubbed the floor. Standard cleaning work. Nothing unusual. Nothing that made me think anything was wrong. By 9 o'clock, the storm had arrived. The rain was coming down hard. The wind was howling around the house. The lightning was flashing through the windows. I could hear the thunder rolling across the sky. I decided to continue working. I was making good progress, and I wanted to finish the job. I moved to the downstairs bathroom. I started cleaning. I was wiping down the tiles when I noticed something. There was a stain on one of the tiles. A stain that looked old. A stain that looked dark. A stain that looked like it might be blood. I stopped cleaning. I looked at it more carefully. The stain was definitely dark. The stain was definitely old. The stain was definitely not normal bathroom dirt. I told myself it was probably just rust staining or something that had been missed during a previous cleaning. But something about it made me uncomfortable. Something about the shape of the stain and its color made me think it was something more sinister. I continued cleaning, but I was now paying attention to other details. I was looking for other stains. I was looking for other things that seemed out of place. And then I found it. In the bedroom upstairs, there was a large stain on the carpet. It was dark brown. It was roughly the size of a body. It was positioned in a way that suggested something significant had happened there. The landlord had mentioned that the house had had some damage from the previous tenants, but I had assumed that was normal wear and tear. This stain didn't look like normal wear and tear. This stain looked like something that had been cleaned up, but not completely removed. I called the landlord. I told him about the stains I had found. I asked him what had happened. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he would call me back. He hung up. I waited for him to call back, but he didn't. The landlord never called me back. I finished the cleaning as best I could. I locked up the house. The storm was still raging as I drove home. My mind was racing. I was thinking about the stains. I was thinking about the landlord's reaction. I was thinking about what could have happened in that house. The next morning I called the police. I reported what I had found. I described the stains. I described the landlord's reaction. A police officer came to interview me. He took photos of the stains I had found. He asked me for the landlord's information. He said they would investigate. 3 days later, I read the news. A woman had been reported missing 3 months earlier. The woman had lived in that house with the landlord. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The police had searched the house, but had found no evidence of foul play. But now, with my report of the stains, they had returned to the house with forensics. They had tested the stains. The stains were blood. The blood was a match to the missing woman. The landlord was arrested. He confessed to murdering the woman in a fit of rage. He had covered up the crime. He had cleaned the house. He had rented it to new tenants. He had tried to move on as if nothing had happened. But the stains remained. The evidence remained. And I had found it. The woman's family was grateful. They said my discovery had brought them closure. They said they could finally lay her to rest, knowing the truth about what happened to her. But I was haunted. I was haunted by the thought that I had almost cleaned over the evidence. I was haunted by the thought that the crime might have gone unsolved if I had just done my job without noticing the stains. The rain that fell that night seemed to mirror the darkness of the crime that had been hidden in that house. The storm seemed to expose what had been covered. And I learned that houses hold memories. Houses hold secrets. Houses hold the evidence of terrible things that happen within their walls. Story 2, The Passenger on the Night Route. My name is Michael Chen, and I'm 40 years old. I work as a bus driver for Metro Transit in Portland, Oregon. And the night a regular passenger didn't get off the bus at her usual stop, and I discovered she was being held against her will, is the night I understood that predators operate in plain sight among people who should be noticing something is wrong. Before I begin, if you work in transportation and something seems off about a passenger, trust that instinct and report it. Keep listening, because the woman I discovered on my bus that night was trapped in a situation that would have continued indefinitely if I had not noticed the pattern. I had been driving the night route for Metro Transit for 6 years. The night route ran from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. It serviced the parts of Portland where people were out late, workers heading home from night shifts, people coming home from bars or clubs, occasional travelers heading to hotels or the airport. Most of my passengers were regulars. I knew their routines. I knew where they got on. I knew where they got off. One of my regular passengers was a young woman named Lisa. She would get on the bus at the downtown stop around 1:15 in the morning. She would always get off at the Riverside Avenue stop about 15 minutes later. She had been doing this for about 3 months. She was always quiet. She never made conversation. She always sat in the back of the bus. She always got off at the same stop. The Thursday night I'm telling you about, Lisa got on the bus at the usual time. The storm had rolled in, and the bus was emptier than usual. Lisa sat in her usual spot in the back. I noticed she had a man with her. The man was sitting next to her. The man seemed to be keeping her close. The man seemed to be making sure she didn't move. I thought it was probably her boyfriend or husband. I thought nothing of it at first. But then something about the dynamic bothered me. Something about the way the man was watching her. Something about the way Lisa was not making eye contact with him. Something about the way her body language suggested fear rather than companionship. When we reached the Riverside Avenue stop, I stopped the bus. I waited for Lisa to get off like she always did. But she didn't get up. The man got up, but Lisa didn't move. The man reached down and pulled her arm. He pulled her up. He was forcing her to stand. He was forcing her to get off the bus with him. I said, "Excuse me." I said, "Is everything okay?" The man turned to look at me. He said, "Everything is fine." He said, "We're just getting off." But Lisa was looking at me. Lisa was making eye contact with me for the first time I could remember. And in her eyes, I could see fear. I could see a silent plea. I could see someone asking for help without being able to speak. I said, "Lisa, do you want to get off here?" She didn't answer immediately. The man squeezed her arm. He said, "Yes. She wants to get off. She wants to get off right now." I said I was asking Lisa, not you. I said, "Lisa, are you okay?" She opened her mouth like she was about to speak, but the man spoke first. He said, "We're leaving." And he started to pull her toward the door. I made a decision. I said, "Stop." I said, "I'm not letting anyone leave this bus under these circumstances." The man turned to me with anger in his eyes. He said, "You need to mind your own business." I said, "This is my business. This is my bus. And if someone on my bus needs help, I am going to make sure they get help." I called the police. I told them about the situation. I told them about the man and the woman and the suspicious behavior. The police said they were dispatching officers. They said to keep the bus where it was. They said to keep the passengers safe. The man realized what I had done. He tried to run. He pulled Lisa toward the door, but I had already activated the door lock. The doors wouldn't open. The man was trapped on my bus. The woman was trapped on my bus. And the police were on their way. When the police arrived, they arrested the man. His name was Derek Matthews. He had been holding Lisa captive for 2 weeks. He had kidnapped her from a parking garage. He had been moving her between different locations. He had been preparing to take her further away when the night shift on public transportation had become a routine he could exploit. Lisa had been too terrified to speak. Lisa had been conditioned to obey. Lisa had almost disappeared completely if I had not noticed something was wrong. The police said if I had not paid attention to the dynamics on my bus, if I had not questioned what was happening, Lisa would have been taken. Lisa would have been lost. The rain that fell that night seemed to provide cover for what was happening. The storm created darkness and isolation. But within that darkness, I was paying attention. I was noticing patterns. I was understanding that something was wrong. And I was brave enough to intervene. Derek Matthews was arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. Lisa was taken to a hospital. She received counseling and support. She eventually recovered enough to testify against her abductor. He's now serving a 20-year sentence. But what haunts me is the knowledge that this happens on buses and trains and in cars every single day. There are people being held captive. There are victims being transported. There are people trapped with their abusers in public spaces. And most people don't notice. Most people don't pay attention. Most people don't want to get involved. I continue to drive my route. I continue to watch my passengers carefully. I continue to understand that my role is not just to transport people, but to be aware of whether those people are safe. I continue to pay attention to patterns. I continue to notice when something is wrong, and I think about Lisa. I think about the fear in her eyes. I think about the moment when she realized that someone was finally paying attention to her suffering. I think about how much courage it took for her to make eye contact with me, knowing that her abductor was right there watching her. The thunderstorm that night was severe and dark and isolating. But within that storm on my bus, I was paying attention. And that attention saved a life. Story 3. The woman in the emergency room. My name is Dr. Angela Foster, and I'm 39 years old. I work as an emergency room physician at Metropolitan Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. And the night a woman came into the emergency room with injuries she couldn't explain, and a story that didn't add up, is the night I discovered that sometimes the greatest danger a patient faces is not from external sources, but from the person they trust the most. Before I begin, if you work in healthcare, understand that domestic violence victims often present with vague explanations for their injuries. Keep listening, because the woman I treated that night was in more danger than she even realized, and what I discovered would require me to take actions that violated patient confidentiality in order to save her life. I had been working as an emergency room physician for 12 years. I had seen countless injuries. I had treated trauma victims. I had treated accident victims. I had treated victims of violence. I had learned to read people. I had learned to understand when someone was telling the truth and when someone was hiding something. I had learned to recognize the signs of abuse, even when patients tried to hide them. The night in question, a woman came into the emergency room around midnight. She had a severe laceration on her arm. She had bruising around her face and neck. She had a broken rib. She had injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. When I asked her what had happened, she told me she had fallen down the stairs at home. She had been carrying laundry, and she had missed a step, and she had tumbled down. The story was familiar. It was the story I had heard 100 times from abuse victims trying to protect their abusers. The injuries didn't match the story. The laceration on her arm was too deep and too precise to have come from falling downstairs. The bruising around her neck suggested strangulation or choking. The broken rib suggested a hard punch or a blow with intention. I examined her more carefully. I asked her about the injuries. She became defensive. She said she knew what happened to her. She said she didn't need me questioning her story. She said she just wanted to be treated and released. I treated her physical injuries. I bandaged the laceration. I ordered x-rays for the rib. I provided pain management. But while I was treating her, I was also asking questions. I was understanding her situation. I was learning that she had a boyfriend. She said he was at home. She said he was waiting for her. She said he would be worried about her. That phrase raised alarm bells for me. A victim of domestic violence often talks about their abuser being worried. They minimize the abuse. They make excuses. They protect their abuser even as they're suffering injuries that the abuser inflicted. I made a decision. I consulted with our social work team. I spoke to our domestic violence advocate. I explained what I had observed. I explained my concerns. The advocate agreed that the story didn't match the injuries. The advocate agreed that this appeared to be a case of intimate partner violence. When the woman was discharged, the advocate approached her. The advocate offered resources. The advocate offered shelter. The advocate offered hope that there was a way out of the situation. The woman initially rejected all of it. She said her boyfriend loved her. She said the injury was her fault for being clumsy. She said everything was fine, but something the advocate said must have resonated. Something must have triggered a moment of clarity. Because 3 days later, the woman came back to the hospital. She came back alone. She came back ready to talk. She came back willing to accept help. Over the next several hours, she told her story. Her name was Catherine. She had been in a relationship with the same man for 4 years. The abuse had started small. It had started with him isolating her from her friends. It had started with him monitoring her activities. It had escalated to pushing and shoving. It had escalated to hitting. It had escalated to the point where Catherine was afraid of saying the wrong thing because she knew it would result in violence. The night of the injury, Catherine had mentioned that she was thinking about leaving. The man had become enraged. He had grabbed her by the throat. He had thrown her down the stairs. He had kicked her ribs. He had cut her arm with a broken glass from a picture frame. Then he had told her to lie about it. Catherine was terrified. She said the man had said that if she ever told anyone the truth, he would kill her. She said she believed him. She said she knew he was capable of doing what he said he would do. I called the police. I reported what Catherine had told me. I provided her statement to law enforcement. The police arrested the man. His name was Marcus. He was charged with assault and battery and domestic violence. He was held without bail pending trial. Catherine accepted help. She went to a domestic violence shelter. She was connected with resources and counseling. She eventually moved away from Chicago to start a new life. She got a restraining order against her abuser. She got her life back. But what haunts me about that night is the realization that Catherine had almost disappeared. If I had accepted her story about falling down the stairs, if I had not questioned the injuries, if I had not consulted with our advocate, Catherine might have gone back home. She might have been killed. The statistics show that women who try to leave abusive relationships are at the highest risk of being murdered by their abusers. Catherine was close to becoming one of those statistics. I think about the moment when she came back to the hospital 3 days later. I think about the courage it took to admit the truth. I think about how many other women are out there right now sitting in emergency rooms with injuries they're lying about. I think about how many times we as medical professionals accept the easy answer instead of pushing for the truth. The thunderstorm that raged on the night Catherine came in seemed to mirror the turbulence of her life. The darkness and the rain seemed to reflect the darkness of her situation. But within that hospital, I was paying attention. I was questioning the story that didn't add up. I was understanding that sometimes the most important diagnosis is not a physical injury, but an emotional one. Sometimes the greatest danger is not from a fall, but from someone you love who is hurting you. Every time I work in the emergency room now, I remember Catherine. Every time a patient comes in with an injury that doesn't match their story, I remember the signs I should be looking for. I remember that abuse is often hidden. I remember that victims are often protecting their abusers. I remember that sometimes the only way to help someone is to question what they're telling you and offer them a path to safety, even when they're not ready to take it. The rain that fell on that night fell on a hospital where a woman found the courage to tell the truth. The rain fell on a place where medical professionals were paying attention. The rain fell on a moment that changed one woman's life forever, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that Catherine was brave. I'm grateful that our advocate understood the signs of abuse. I'm grateful that I didn't accept the simple explanation and that I pushed for the real story. Because somewhere right now, another woman is sitting in an emergency room with an injury she's lying about. Another woman is protecting an abuser. Another woman is in danger, and the only thing standing between that woman and her own Catherine moment is someone who is paying attention. Someone who questions the story. Someone who understands that abuse is often hidden, but always leaves signs for those who are looking for them. The thunderstorm that night was real and dark and seemed to match the darkness of what was happening in this city. But it also provided a backdrop for a story of survival. It provided a setting for a moment of truth. It provided the environment in which one woman found the courage to ask for help, and one doctor decided to really listen.